Do you wonder if you have a problem with alcohol? Are you someone that starts thinking about happy hour while you're eating your lunch? Do you find it difficult to have a glass of wine with dinner and then call it for the evening? Or possibly you're like me and you know somewhere deep down within yourself that you definitely have a problem with alcohol. But the mere thought of quitting is so terrifying that you avoid the issue altogether. If so, don't miss today's episode here on Living Beyond Limits. I'm your host, Marcy Langlois. We're going to take a deep dive into how to get honest with yourself about your alcohol consumption. We're going to look at the real reason that you think alcohol isn't the problem, why it's so hard to be honest with yourselves about it, what the signs are that you may be living in denial, and then how to blow the cover off the denial if that is indeed what you're doing. I don't know about you, but I never grew up saying, I want to be an alcoholic. I don't know anybody that does, right? In fact, I wanted more than anything to never have that title associated with my name because of all the stigma around alcoholism and addiction. And one step further, the last person on the planet that I wanted to be like was my father. And yet there I was following right in his footsteps. The truth is though, is that addiction in any form isn't pretty. I spent years trying to prove to myself that I could control how much or how often I drank. It never worked. I would set goals for myself though, like I'm only going to drink on the weekends and it would be Monday and I'd be right back at the bar. Or I'm going to quit drinking for 30 days. If I can do that, that will for sure prove that I'm good. And I definitely don't have a problem. Except I couldn't make it through the first day. The first day I was drinking after I just set the resolution not to drink for 30 days. I couldn't just have one drink and I couldn't just simply not drink. I had crossed the line and no longer had any control over how much or how often I drank. The thought of not drinking ever again seemed so scary, and frankly, it felt impossible. There are so many things that make us think that alcohol isn't the problem. The number one thing that kept me stuck in addiction was my inability to be honest with myself. I don't know if any of what I have shared thus far sounds familiar to you, but if so, it might be helpful to know that I caused myself a tremendous amount of suffering and pain by not being able to get honest with myself sooner. I let my family, employers, and friends down because of my inability to be honest. Things were a mess and it was obvious to everyone around me, but I simply wasn't willing to acknowledge it. I mean, it was glaringly obvious. And I was just like, I don't want to see it. Not only was I unable to be honest with myself, I was in complete denial. I would literally have conversations with myself on the way to the bar about, hey, if you're an alcoholic, then you wouldn't still have a job. You wouldn't have a roof over your head. You wouldn't have this car that you're driving. I told myself things like alcoholics live under the bridge. And look at me. I'm still completely highly functioning. Look at my life. Everything's intact. These were the stories that I used to continue to keep drinking. Denial is a powerful coping mechanism to keep us from looking at ourselves. The last thing I wanted to do was really admit that there was an issue, because if so, then what? Like if I really said I'm an alcoholic, then what do I have to do about it? Well, typically when you pull the covers back and you see that stark naked truth staring you right in the face of any situation, then you have to do something about it. I felt like if I admitted it and I said it, I do have a problem, then I was going to feel responsible to go ahead and make this change. The truth was, for years and years, I didn't want to make a change. I wasn't ready to stop drinking. Maybe that's true for you too. And only you can answer that for yourself. What I've discovered is that the reason I didn't want to think about living without alcohol is because I couldn't imagine facing the world sober. That was my reality. I couldn't imagine it. Like actually look at my life, my experiences, and oh my God, my feelings. Like you want me to feel my feelings? Yeah, that might be for some people, but I wasn't interested at all. So let's look at this a bit more closely. And why is it so hard to be honest with ourselves? Well, the first thing I know that prevented me from being honest with myself was fear. Man, it is such a doozy. When you start to really think through all of the what ifs, like what if I really am an alcoholic? And what if I am really responsible for this mess my life is? Acknowledging all of this can create a sense of fear and overwhelm that is just unbelievable. Fear about what this means about who and what you are, and overwhelmed because how are you going to change things? Starting to look at the ways that you may have failed in your life because you had an issue with alcohol is a difficult place to be. And the emotions that come with it can knock the wind out of you. If this is all true, then it looks like you're going to need some help to get things under control. And vulnerability to even ask for help doesn't typically come easy for most people. It isn't only fear that makes being honest with ourselves difficult, it's also the idea of having to be accountable for our actions. You have spent all this time trying to avoid the truth of what's really going on. And now, bam, it's staring you in the face and there's no denying it any longer. Well, damn, now that you know the truth, that things are as bad as what you feared, you likely are going to have to do something about it. Most people are like me and they don't want to do anything about it. And that's why they spend so much time trying to avoid it to begin with. And the biggest whammy for most people is the pain around admitting that there's a problem. Let's face it, admitting that you have a problem with alcohol is so incredibly painful. It is mired in a sense of shame and failure. Truthfully, the shame of admitting that we have a problem is what keeps people drinking long after they know that they need help. I'll never, ever forget sitting in my first 12-step meeting and saying out loud to a group of strangers, "I'm Marcy, and I'm an alcoholic." I had tears running down my cheeks because I felt like I had completely failed in my life in every possible way. I had so much shame about who I had become that I couldn't even look anyone in the eye. It's a real thing to feel deep pain because you have completely obliterated your life. Not only are you having to step up and acknowledge one of the most painful truths about yourself, but you have to do it without using alcohol to numb the incredibly difficult feelings that come along with it. It's a lot. I've been there and I know. So that's why denial is so appealing. It's such a powerful contributor to avoid issues with alcohol. In fact, denial is what allows us to keep the shenanigans going long after we know that we need to stop. Here's some signs that may help you identify if you're living in denial, but don't even know it because you're using denial as a coping mechanism to help you avoid facing your truth about alcohol. 1, you spend a great deal of time trying to portray that everything is amazing and wonderful, even though the house is like on fire all around you. After all, you have an image to maintain. So you do everything in your power to show up looking like you got this, right? You show up for a scheduled meeting on time, even though you were up all night throwing up because you drank so much. Or you manage to pick up your kids from school and you think you deserve a gold star for the day, but you failed to acknowledge that you've been drinking since noon. Number 2, you convince yourself with your own internal dialogue that everything's fine. You might tell yourself things like, "I'm drinking to have fun and relax. My drinking isn't hurting anyone at all. I can stop drinking anytime that I want to. I can have one drink and stop if I wanted to." These were like some of my top favorite themes that I used to try to convince myself that everything was fine and I didn't really have a problem. Number 3, you simply deny the truth of your reality. You think you got all things nailed down, but meanwhile, your coffee cup is full of vodka. Your one glass of wine at night, because you're so amazing, you've cut back to just one glass, is actually the size of a fishbowl. So yeah, you only have one glass of wine, but it's this big, right? Great job. But the one glass holds a bottle. You hide your bottles under the couch cushions. You stop recycling your glass because you don't want the neighbors to see how much you drink. Instead of going to the same liquor store or bar, you rotate through different ones because you don't want anyone there to think that you actually have a problem. Even in the midst of all this crazy behavior, you're still unwilling to see that you indeed have a problem. Phew. That stuff is super heavy, right? When you lay it all out like that and you see it for what it is, it's a lot. If you're still here listening, then you're probably wondering, what do I do next? The most important thing you can do from here is blow the lid off the denial. Get honest with yourself. Take the deep dive into the truth. As I said earlier, it's going to be painful, but it is a lot less painful than living a life consumed by alcohol. If you would have told me this 21 years ago, I would have told you that you were crazy and that you had no idea what you were talking about. Let's get real. If you're doing any of these things that I have mentioned, then there's a very good chance you have an issue with alcohol. There's so much support available that you can reach out online, in-person meetings, treatment facilities, both inpatient and outpatient. So there's so many options available for whatever your situation might be. Get the help that you need. You so deserve this. You don't need to be living consumed by alcohol. That's such a painful place to be. There is a way out. I did it, and I know you can too. Friends, I've walked you through all the ways that it can be difficult to get honest with yourself about your alcohol consumption. I've laid out the ways that keep us cemented in our patterns and walked you through the path of denial to illuminate these things that you may be doing that are keeping you stuck, as well as offered resources to find your way to a solution and better days. I'm right here with you in this. I know that this path isn't easy, but I also know that it is one of the most rewarding things I've ever done. I always want to hear from my listeners. So please reach out to me while you're on this journey. If you feel stuck or you can't find the help that you're needing, I can try to help point you in the direction or offer support in that moment. So please reach out. I would love to connect with you. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's so good for me to remind myself of the truth about how addiction shows up, the reality of it, right? This is exactly what it looks like and sounds like. If you found this episode helpful, then please share it with your community of people. Please follow me on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. I look forward to connecting with you next week. I'll be sending all the positive vibes for you as you embark on your own journey to live beyond the limits of alcohol.